So, I'm interested in the role that experts play as advisors during times of crisis. And what I'm looking at in this talk is really when scientists who usually work as academics in university departments or research institutes get pulled onto expert panels to advise government decision makers. And the key kind of context I have in mind is the COVID pandemic, and especially the beginning of the pandemic when we really didn't know a lot and the situation was changing rapidly. And there was this difficult desire for scientific information and answers when the scientists themselves really didn't know a lot about what was going on. And in that situation, we saw a lot of expert disagreement. So there were lots of models of what would happen in the pandemic, and those models disagreed hugely. Some of them had 10 times as many people getting infected or dying as other models did. There were also disagreements because there was limited data coming out of China and Italy in the early pandemic, and the way that scientists interpreted that data was quite different. And that posed a real challenge, a challenge for decision makers who were trying to figure out what to do, a challenge for people like us who are just trying to decide what we should do personally, but it also posed a kind of challenge to those experts who were on the panels. They needed to work out how they should deal with the fact that other experts disagreed with them and what they should say as a group to those decision makers. And what I explore in my paper is kind of a tension between some considerations that pull them in the direction of what I'm calling intellectual humility, which is expressed as a kind of cautious attitude, a kind of calibration of how confident they are given the reality of the situation. And then there are these other factors that pull them towards being really clear and determinate in their advice. So an example of factors that pull in the first direction towards humility is just the fact that these policy problems they're being asked to give input on are really messy and they don't really fit inside the neatly defined boxes of university departments. So they might be asked, for example, should we close schools in this district? And that question crosses a whole bunch of different areas of science. It involves epidemiology, facts about the disease, whether kids get it, how severely, how they transmit it, facts about their educational attainment, their psychological well-being if they stay home, a bunch of economic facts about the impact on their parents, who will have to then look after them, the impact on the people who work in the schools, and so on. So nobody's really the expert on a topic like that, and that's a reason that they should adopt this kind of intellectual humility when they approach giving advice on a topic like that. But then there are these factors that pull in the other direction, and there I think the key one to focus on is just how urgent the situation was. There was this real sense that delaying a decision like closing schools by a few days or a week could lead to thousands more infections, many more people ending up in hospital and dying. And there just isn't really space for an expert to take a position like, well, we don't know, the science is really unclear, we need more data. Those are all perfectly normal things for experts to say. They're even virtuous things for experts to say in the ordinary course of science. But there's this kind of real pressure in a time of crisis to just give an answer. And so when experts disagree, they have these factors on the one hand which pull them to say, well, maybe the disagreement is because we have different disciplinary perspectives, and it could be that neither one of us is wrong. And so it's fine to just express the disagreement, to just communicate. Here's what they think, here's what I think, here's a range of options. But on the other hand, that urgency, that kind of moral imperative to save lives, that pushes in the direction of just giving a clear answer, of sticking to your guns if you think you're right because it's so important to get the right answer. So that's a deep tension. And I don't think that there's an easy solution to it. But what I do in the paper is I sort of explore a way of reframing the problem that can help to dissolve some of the real difficulty and the tension. And the key suggestion is basically to shift from seeing this expert disagreement as an epistemic problem, like a problem that the experts need to solve and find the right answer to, and shift to seeing the role of the expert as being a kind of helper to the decision maker, and seeing that disagreement as just being information that the decision maker can use. So I offer 3 suggestions in the paper for how scientists, experts can get closer to that. The first thing is just to learn more about policymaking and to understand that policy decisions are a complex mixture of factors. They require scientific information, But despite the slogans, the science can't just tell us what to do. We can't follow the science because these decisions require moral evaluations, like trading off the well-being of those kids who are going to miss out on school against the well-being of their grandparents who are going to get severely ill and perhaps die. They require political considerations, working out what's feasible, what you can get through a legislative process, what's legal. And those things have to be combined together with the scientific evidence in quite a complex way. And I think understanding more about that will help scientists to, firstly, alleviate some of this pressure on them to give the right answer, which in part I think is made worse by thinking that you are the person who provides the solution, but also shift to seeing how the machine works, and that can enable them, I think, to communicate more effectively. And so the second suggestion that I make really is about this kind of engagement. Once they understand the process, they need to get their hands dirty and really help the policymaker. So shift from giving answers to opening up space for consideration, helping them to think of new options, helping them to understand how some of the policy levers they have will interact with the things we understand about the disease, so which kind of causal levers they can pull, what it is that stops the disease spreading. And then to communicate uncertainty in a way that's very linked to these policy options. So rather than giving a presentation about the spread of the disease and the uncertainty in a scientific parameter like the R factor, instead shifting towards articulating uncertainty with respect to what's on the table. So if somebody wants to close schools, for example, we may not know very much about how children are involved in transmitting the disease. That can then enable a kind of communication of uncertainty, which says, well, there's this key thing we don't know. If it turns out that kids are really important in transmitting the disease, here's what might happen if you close schools. If it turns out they're not at all important, here's what could happen. And we are uncertain about that, so you need to think about both these outcomes. That's a way of translating this scientific uncertainty into language that the policymaker can understand, because it's really connected to what they can do. So taken together, what these suggestions are trying to do is to reorient the way we think about expert advice away from being a source of knowledge where there's great pressure to provide these truths, and which views these truths as being kind of the key ingredient in getting the answer right, towards seeing the expert as a kind of helper. So it's in that role, seeing yourself as a helper, that the humility comes back in, because it requires the experts to kind of see themselves as sort of secondary participants in a way in this policy making process. And so that's kind of the key takeaway from the talk.